Morning, everyone. David rang me up and asked me to come and talk at a breakfast meeting about funding retrofit. I thought, would I get up early for that? But quite a lot of you have, so that's okay. I'm also conscious that those of you over there probably can't see the screen because the panel is in the way, but it's death by PowerPoint, this one anyway, so don't worry. Just listen, it'll be fine. Funding retrofit's a pretty dry subject, but it's actually, I think, the way to approach it is this a challenge or is it an opportunity? Somehow, nationally, over the next 35 to 40 years, to meet our climate change targets, we have to deeply retrofit something like 2 million dwellings, and something like 20 million dwellings, and something like 2 million non-domestic buildings. And if you work it out, you can divide 20 million dwellings by the 40 years or so. It comes out at 500,000 a year, or 1 a minute. So we have to be delivering retrofit quite seriously, in quite a big way. Those of us who work on the costs of retrofit here at Core and elsewhere are pretty much agreed that to do it properly it costs 25 grand a dwelling. Multiply 25 grand by 2 million and you end up with 500 billion. So funding retrofit is either a 500 billion pound challenge, which we all have to take part in, or it's a 500 billion pound business opportunity. And I think depending on whether you're a glass half full or a glass half empty person, you fall on either side of that division. So what I thought I'd do today is just start out by saying that no way have we got that funding. Okay? Paul Morell, the government's old former construction advisor, said that basically everybody has to pay a bit to improve their own home, and we all have to pay a bit more to help the people who can't afford to improve their homes to do that. And so we have to sort of spread the burden. And so funding of retrofit is going to be a case of programs that subsidize, programs that give grants, programs that channel funds. It's going to be a rich and complex funding environment. And we've only just started out, and there's some of you who have been, well, you'd have to have been a hermit not to have heard of the Green Deal by now, I guess, and you probably noticed it isn't doing very well. And so I think we're going to try with our funding schemes to get it right, and we're going to have some successes and some failures. So this is a rich and evolving environment. What I want to talk about really, just very briefly, I've only got 20 minutes so I need to keep going, is the Green Deal. Don't write it off, it hasn't gone away. There's lots of Green Deal money coming out through the Green Deal Communities Fund these days. The Green Deal Home Improvement Fund, which is a new kid on the block. The Energy Company Obligation, which again, you might think it's kind of died, but it's still there. The feed-in tariff, the renewable heat incentive. But that's not the full spectrum of funding. There's also quite a lot of European money around. Quite a lot of it was used to build this place, as some of you know. And there are all sorts of ways of constructing funding routes and funding options for delivering retrofit programs. And I'm sure that many more will arise over the coming years. Let's just talk about the Green Deal. I guess most people will have heard of it. You may have thought that it's not going very far. It's probably true at the moment. It's essentially a piece of legislation which allows third-party funding of the capital investment needed for retrofit via commercial organisations called Green Deal providers. What happens is the dwelling gets assessed by a Green Deal assessor, and a Green Deal plan or a Green Deal advice report are prepared. The householder then signs up to that plan. The Green Deal finance company lends money at an exorbitant interest rate to the Green Deal provider, or through the Green Deal provider, to the householder or the landlord. The improvements are carried out by accredited installers, and then the capital cost is repaid via a charge applied to the electricity meter of the house. The debt of charge is attached to the meter and the dwelling, not to the occupants. So when the occupancy changes, the new occupants who enjoy the benefit of the improvements to the house also have to pay their share of the cost. It's all horribly complicated, isn't it? And that's one of the reasons why take-up has been poor. Quite a difficult scheme to explain in 5 lines, very difficult scheme to operate. It has this thing in it called the Golden Rule. And the Golden Rule says that the repayments that are made through the electricity meter of the household must not exceed the expected savings in fuel costs. So if I improve David's house and I save him £800 a year, the maximum charge I can put on his electricity meter is £800 a year. And that's a very difficult limit, partly because the interest rate takes about £400 of the £800. And partly because it means that essentially there's no saving to the occupants. And to sell the Green Deal, you have to say to householders, you will be less worse off than you would be in an era of rising fuel prices if you don't do the Green Deal than if you do. So you give that to anyone in marketing and they'll tell you that's a real no-no message. You have to spend this money to be less worse off than you would have been. So there's clearly a problem. The other problem with the Golden Rule and the Green Deal is that essentially it doesn't do anything about fuel poverty. And most householders are rather, in lower income areas, are rather more interested in the fuel poverty issue and keeping warm than they are at saving carbon. So we've got a mechanism for third-party funding which is not particularly simple and attractive at the moment in the Green Deal. The factors leading to the poor take-up have been this restriction of the Golden Rule, the fact that our fuel prices are too low. You might not agree with me on this, might not agree with me on that, but I think it's probably true. That the scheme will not pay for all the necessary measures. You can't, for instance, fund ventilation, and any one of the core fellows here doing retrofit work will tell you that if you do retrofit without ventilation, it's not a retrofit project, it's a condensation project. So we can't fund ventilation out of the Green Deal. It's not very useful in social housing, so if any of you are in the social housing business, there's a problem between the tenant and the landlord, who actually is responsible for the improvements. We have problems with permissions and leaseholders in blocks. And there are some procurement procedures in the public sector with which the Green Deal doesn't fit very comfortably. Probably more importantly, at the moment, private householders are proving unwilling to invest. The scheme's quite complicated, the interest rate's too high, there's low perceived value in retrofit at the moment, uncertain effect on house values, and most households seem to have other priorities before retrofit at the moment. So we have some work to do with the Green Deal. Meanwhile, other strands, some organisations, some public bodies, particularly London boroughs actually, are looking at what we call do-it-yourself, pay-as-you-save, a Green Deal type scheme in which the local authority uses its prudential borrowing powers, if it has any left, to borrow at a better rate than they can borrow from the Green Deal Finance Company. Green Deal Finance Company's rate is about 7%, which makes most people's eyebrows rise, given that the 0% Bank of England base rate at the moment. Most local authorities can borrow at 3.5% at the moment. So it's possible for local authorities to construct their own pay-as-you-save schemes and to offer the funding to households in their area on a Green Deal kind of basis, at a rather better rate. In these kind of schemes, the Golden Rule still applies, but you get more measures out of the pot because it's a lower interest rate. So in the case of David's house, if I've saved him his 800, he's not going to be paying 400 in interest. He might be paying 200 in interest, so I've got 200 to spend on some more improvements to his house. And there's also the possibility of pool funding, which one of the London boroughs has been working on. The idea that you apply the pay-as-you-save charge as an average to all the dwellings in the whole borough. And then you get subsidy from the other schemes we're going to talk about, the energy company obligation, the feed-in tariff, the RHI, and some Green Deal funding, and you distribute that into the pool. You get it on the basis of what dwellings qualify, but you pool all the money. So everybody pays a bit, and everybody shares the benefits of the retrofit. That's another route that's being used to see if we can kind of break the logjam a bit. The Green Deal Home Improvement Fund arrived quite recently. Has anybody heard of it or used it? No hands up. Okay. Very recent addition to DEC's portfolio of ways of funding retrofit for the domestic sector. It's a voucher-based subsidy scheme for domestic retrofit. Potentially every home in the UK is eligible, although there are some state aid rules that are being explored at the moment that may be a problem. Every home to have funding from the Green Deal Home Improvement Fund must have an EPC, an Energy Performance Certificate, or a Green Deal Advice Report that's less than 2 years old. There's a £136 million budget in DEC for the Green Deal HIF. This year it's 50 million, but it's going fast. They've already allocated something like 16 million of it in the first 4 weeks. The core grant is £1,000 to fund 2 measures out of a list of 12, and I'll show you the list on the next slide. And that covers insulation, heating, appliances, and so on, but still no ventilation. Then you can have £6,000 per dwelling maximum as a contribution to the cost of solid wall insulation, internal or external, But that can only be 75% of the total cost. So basically, if you can get your external wall insulation for £8,000, you can fund it essentially. You only need the £2,000 to do the two, because you can get the 6,000 maximum grant. And then, rather bizarrely, there's a retrospective grant of £100 for your Green Deal advice report, so you get the money back that you spent on your Green Deal assessment. And if you bought the house within the last 12 months, they give you a £500 bonus for nothing. So kind of help to buy in reverse, offset of stamp duty. So that's quite an attractive scheme, and it's proving pretty attractive to householders at the moment. Those who've got a little bit of capital to deploy to supplement the subsidy. These are the measures, so you can do any of that stuff with the Green Deal Home Improvement Fund. Then we've got the famous energy company obligation. Colleagues here who know all about that. Replaced the existing, or the original supplier obligation programs, the CERT and CESP and so on, Warm Front, in 2012. Essentially, the big fuel supply companies, the big fuel energy retailers are obliged to spend, currently it's about collectively 0.65 billion per year until 2017 to improve, well basically to save carbon by improving the energy efficiency of homes and other buildings. So working with our owners, occupiers and tenants of buildings to improve their energy efficiency. Eco focuses on dwellings where the Green Deal Golden Rule is difficult to meet, or at least it was intended to. That's fuel-poor households, and it's hard to treat dwellings. Solid walls, off the gas network, those kinds of types of dwellings. And there's a very variable market for eco because of the way it works is that you calculate your emission savings and then you negotiate with the energy provider company as to what they'll pay for your carbon savings. The eco process looks like this. You get your Green Deal advice report, so you've had your assessor. You identify the eligible measures from the Green Deal advice report. Pretty much the triggering measure is solid wall insulation or the dwelling being off the gas network. You establish the lifetime carbon dioxide emission savings resulting from the improvements you propose to make. The SAP assessment gives you that information. You multiply the annual savings calculated by the SAP by some in-use factors which are set by Ofgem, which are a reduction, a kind of making them more realistic. You multiply those annual savings, those reduced annual savings, by the lifetimes of the measures, which are also set by Ofgem, and you come up with the lifetime carbon dioxide emission savings. So you've got, in your basket, you've got so many tons of CO2. You then take that off to E.ON or wherever, and you negotiate. And the value that you'll get for those tons of carbon, which are in fact they're effectively you're offsetting the energy company's obligation, the value is affected by the priorities they have, the timescale that's left, whether they're anywhere near their quota, and all those kinds of things. So last year they were paying roughly £140 a tonne for carbon dioxide emission savings from dwellings. This year it's, especially from solid wall insulation, this year it's kind of less than 50 in most cases because the deadlines have kind of receded from 2015 to 2017. And at the moment, mostly the energy companies are funding the low-cost measures, the cavity fills, the loft insulations, those kinds of things. There is some solid wall insulation going on, but not as much as we'd like. So eco has been a bit lumpy, and one of the things we said to the government very long ago in the development of this process of driving retrofit forward was they need to establish a stable policy environment to encourage industry to invest, including local industry. It's probably fairly obvious to all of you that hasn't happened. I'm beginning to think that in a 5-year cycle of democracy it's probably never going to happen, but we would like a smoother policy environment than we've had so far, and there are some of us working on that at the moment. The feed-in tariff, you may remember, scheme to promote renewable electricity, solar PV, wind power, domestic CHP and so on. It's funded by a levy on all our electricity bills, so all of you are paying for the feed-in tariff, whether you've got PV on your roof or not. It's about 60 quid a year that you're paying. The tariff pays for all power that you generate locally. At the end of June, it was 14.38 pence per kilowatt hour, plus 4.77 pence for the 50% of the kilowatt hours that you're deemed to export back to the grid. It goes down all the time. There's a process called degression, whereby as the capital cost of the technology like solar PV comes down, which is what the scheme's intended to do, make it come down, as the capital cost comes down, so the tariff is reduced, to the income. It's supposed to be relatively stable at enough income to give you an 8-year return or an 8-year payback on the capital. The point about the feed-in tariff is you have to have the money to start with. It doesn't provide you with capital growth. So what the feed-in tariff does is it provides a combination of free electricity for the people in the house or in the building, zero carbon electricity to reduce emissions, and a 20-year index-linked income to repay the investment in less than 20 years. Debt claims 8, but I don't think you can do it in 8, actually, at current rates. And if you look at a 1 kilowatt peak power PV array to go on a roof, it costs you about 2,000 grand, two grand, and it'll return something of the order of £125 a year in feed-in tariff. So you can do the math yourself. It's not an 8-year return, but it's not far off. Finally, there's something that's very similar is the renewable heat incentive. Scheme to promote local renewable heat. It's been a very long time coming. It supports biofuel boilers, combined heat and power, heat pumps, and solar water heating. Pays a tariff for all heat that's generated by the installation. For solar water heating, it's about 20 pence per kilowatt hour for 7 years this time. If you want to put 4 square metres of solar water panels on your roof, that will cost you about £1,500 and return about £200 a year. So it's a relatively attractive investment if you've got the capital. Again, it's funded by a levy on our fuel bills, so we're all paying for it, even if we're not using it. So the RHI provides a combination of free heat for the residents. If you do the right solar thermal for your hot water, you can get about half your hot water costs over the course of a year from the sun, mostly in the summer, of course. It provides low or zero carbon heat to reduce emissions, and it gives either the occupants or the landlord a 7-year income stream to subsidise the investment. Now, I put this in because otherwise it was going to be death by PowerPoint. This is just to kind of illustrate how it's all supposed to work. And in the middle here is our home that we want to improve. It might be a resident of Stoke, an owner-occupier, it might be a landlord's tenant, whatever. Up at the top there is the Green Deal and Eco, with the assessor top left, the Green Deal provider in the middle, the energy company providing the eco funding on the right, and the Green Deal finance company, the lender, up at the top. And then down here is the feed-in tariff in blue, bottom left, and the renewable heat incentive, bottom right. And as you can see, one of the problems with government-funded programs is that they develop large numbers of players and lots of complexity. There are actually 9 arrows going into or out of that house. So it's not something that Mr. or Mrs. Smith are going to be able to manage for themselves. There's clearly a role for local authority and for local authority agencies, marshalling local SMEs to help us all understand this stuff, to start to bring programs together and make them transparent to the householder and transparent to the tenants, such that we can deliver the retrofit using all these complicated funding streams in a sensible way that maximises the income. And just a kind of final word for those involved in social housing. There's a real need now, I think, to take a new approach to the way we think about retrofit in social housing. And certainly social housing organisations will be clients for a lot of SMEs doing retrofit in local areas over the next few years. I mean, the problem is that social housing will be going through this tunnel called Decent Homes. And Decent Homes was a kind of £19 billion programme dropped into the social housing sector in 2004. They're coming out of the tunnel now and they're kind of blinking in the sunlight, oh, we did that, but there's no tracks anymore. They don't know where to go. So housing asset managers now are looking to know, well, what should they be doing next? And they know that retrofit is somewhere in the agenda. What we need to encourage them to do is to refocus their asset management on retrofit, to be part of this programme, this £500 billion programme of retrofitting 220 million dwellings over 40 years. We need comprehensive retrofit plans with a medium-term improvement plan for each dwelling type. We need to marshal the funding from multiple sources. The role of an expert project manager in retrofit has kind of emerged, and Bob Pruitt and other fellows here coined the term retrofit coordinator to cover someone who is not only a technical expert in retrofit, but has the triple role of the project management from end to end, the customer care, dealing with Mrs. Smith, and being the one point of contact and the one person that gets kicked when it goes wrong, and finally doing the quality assurance and all the inspections and signing off. And so we've been building the training for retrofit coordinators here. We have a program running in London at the moment. We have another one running here in the autumn. We have another one running in London later, and we're going to be running programs, I believe, in Scotland and all over the place. So we're trying to build a cadre of these experts in retrofit on whom you can draw, and we'd also want to encourage anyone with technical interest in retrofit, project management experience, good quality assurance experience, customer care work, to think about whether they might become a retrofit coordinator, and we can offer them packages of training here at Core. That's enough from me. I'll hand you back to the chairman.